The scent of cinnamon and baked apples filled my kitchen as I pulled a golden pie from the oven. It was my son's favorite, the one I made every year without fail. But before I could set it on the counter, my phone chimed with a new notification. Without thinking, I tapped it. That is when my entire world shifted in the space of 20 seconds. A voice message played automatically. Evan's voice. My son's voice. Harsh, tired, filled with irritation I had not heard before. I can't stand this useless old hag anymore. Once she finally takes her last nap, Lena and I will be celebrating in Paris with all that money. The pie nearly slipped from my hands. My own son, talking about me, talking about my death like it was overdue rent. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my ears, listening again and again just to make sure I had not misheard. But it was clear. He meant me. He sent the message to me by mistake. For 30 years of marriage, Harold and I built a home filled with trust. I thought I had carried that into widowhood. But in that moment, with the pie cooling on the counter and betrayal burning in my chest, I knew Harold's quiet warnings had been right all along. My name is Joanna Whitaker. I am 64 years old, a retired school registrar, and I live alone in the same house where my husband Harold and I raised our children. For the most part, I have lived a steady and peaceful life. Harold planted roses every spring along the back fence, and I still keep them trimmed just the way he liked. The house holds layers of our history, every photograph and every creaking floorboard a reminder of the years we built together. I believed widowhood would mean quiet days, a slower rhythm, maybe even a chance to discover new interests. Instead, I discovered something much darker. Betrayal was not coming from strangers or neighbors, but from the people I thought I could trust most. My own son and his wife. This was not just about money. If it were, I might have dismissed it as desperation or bad judgment. What I heard in Evan's voice was different. It was calculation, impatience, and a casual cruelty that made my blood turn cold. He was not just waiting for an inheritance. He was waiting for me to disappear. That was the moment I understood the stakes. This was not only about finances or property. It was about my dignity, my safety, and my right to live without fear in the home Harold and I had built together. Looking back, I realized the warning signs had been there all along. At first, they were easy to excuse. Evan started missing phone calls. He canceled visits at the last minute, often with vague explanations about work deadlines. Lena, ever cheerful, began steering every conversation toward my living arrangements. "This house must feel so big for you," she would say, her eyes scanning the furniture as though she were cataloging items for a future estate sale. Then came the brochures. Glossy pamphlets slipped onto my coffee table with titles like Silver Pines and Meadowview. Each one featured smiling gray-haired couples painting watercolors or doing yoga in bright community rooms. "You'd make so many friends," Lena insisted. Evan nodded along, highlighting amenities like housekeeping and transportation. They called it independence, but I heard something different in their voices. Urgency. The pressure grew stronger. One Sunday afternoon, they arrived with a folder of financial documents. Evan suggested I meet with his friend, a financial advisor. "Mom, you don't want to outlive your money," he said, as if I had never managed a budget. What stung most was the tone, a mix of pity and impatience. It was not care. It was reconnaissance. They were measuring, testing, looking for weaknesses. At the time, I brushed it off. But after hearing that voicemail, every moment replayed in my mind with a new clarity. They had not been checking on me. They had been circling me. The memory of Harold's last months came rushing back to me that night. He had always been the careful one, the steady hand in every storm. Even as cancer drained his strength, his mind stayed sharp. Lying in his hospital bed, he squeezed my hand and said, "Joanna, people change when money enters the room. Even family. Promise me you'll be ready if that day comes." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Our children loved us, I told him. They would never treat me as anything but their mother. But Harold's eyes carried a weight I could not ignore. He had worked too many years, seen too many families torn apart over inheritances and property. So he set things in motion, meetings with his trusted friend, attorney Victor Hale, folders with sealed envelopes marked only for me, instructions that sounded unnecessary back then, almost paranoid. I promised Harold I would honor them if the need arose. Now, standing in the quiet of our kitchen with Evan's voice echoing in my ears, I finally understood. The day Harold warned me about had arrived. I sat at the kitchen table with the pie untouched and my phone heavy in my hand. My fingers hovered for only a moment before I dialed the number Harold had made me memorize. Victor Hale answered on the second ring, his voice calm and steady as always. "Joanna, is everything all right?" "Victor," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, "do you remember the contingency plan Harold asked you to prepare?" There was a pause on the other end. "Are you saying it is time?" "It is time." Victor did not ask for details. He did not press me to explain what had happened. Instead, his tone shifted into the measured cadence of a man who had practiced this scenario for years. "Then I will make the calls tonight. By morning, the documents will be active. Every safeguard Harold requested will be in place." When I ended the call, a strange calm settled over me. My hands were steady again. Evan and Lena thought they were dealing with a gullible widow still lost in grief. What they would face instead was a woman armed with a plan designed by a husband who knew her better than anyone else. The next morning arrived clear and bright, the kind of day Harold would have spent pruning roses. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Evan and Lena stood there wearing smiles that looked carefully practiced. Evan wrapped me in a hug that felt stiff, rehearsed. Lena held out a bouquet of daisies. I had been allergic to daisies for 20 years, but I thanked her anyway. Some battles could wait. Come in," I said, guiding them to the living room. I poured coffee and set out cups. Their eyes moved around the room, cataloging and appraising. Lena's gaze lingered on my grandmother's china cabinet. Evan studied the photographs on the mantel as if he were already deciding which ones to keep. After a few minutes of small talk, Evan leaned forward. "Mom, Lena and I have been thinking about your situation here." "My situation?" He exchanged a look with her before continuing. "This house is too much for one person. You should not be worrying about repairs or grocery runs. You deserve comfort." Lena pulled a glossy brochure from her tote bag and spread it across the coffee table. "Look at this one, Millbrook Estates. It has restaurants, a golf course, even transportation. You would never have to lift a finger." I scanned the page, noting the monthly fee of $8,000. "This looks expensive." "That is the beauty of it," Lena said brightly. "You would sell this house, and the proceeds would cover years of living there, completely worry-free." And there it was, the phrase that revealed everything. I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care. "Evan," I said, "before we go further, I have something I think you should hear." I tapped my phone, and the living room filled with his own voice, sharp and impatient. "I can't stand this useless old hag anymore. Once she finally takes her last nap, Lena and I will be celebrating in Paris with all that money." The color drained from his face. Lena's gasp was immediate, her hand flying to her mouth. Evan stammered, "Mom." That was taken out of context. I was frustrated. I did not mean. "Frustrated?" I repeated, my tone even. "You were speaking about my death as if it were overdue?" Lena's voice trembled. "Margaret, it was a private conversation. He has been stressed, worried about you living alone." "Worried?" I raised my eyebrow and held up my phone again. A screenshot of Lena's Instagram glowed on the screen. A caption that read, "Romantic Paris getaway finally booked. Can't wait." The date was 3 days earlier. Lena's face went pale. "That post, that was for our anniversary next year." "Your anniversary is in March," I replied calmly. "This says September, next month." Silence spread across the room, thick and heavy. The performance was over, and the truth had nowhere left to hide. Before either of them could recover, my phone rang on cue. I answered on speaker. "This is Joanna Whitaker." "Mrs. Whitaker, this is Victor Hale. I am calling to confirm that all documents we discussed have been filed with the court as of this morning. Everything Harold set in place is now legally binding." "Thank you, Victor," I said, making sure my voice carried across the room. "I am relieved to know Harold's protection plan is active." The words hung in the air like a hammer strike. Evan's jaw clenched. "Protection plan? What does that mean?" "It means," I replied evenly, "that if either of my children attempts to manipulate, coerce, or pressure me into decisions about my finances, living situation, or medical care, every dollar of my estate bypasses you and goes directly to charity. Harold planned for this long before you ever brought your brochures." Lena gripped her purse until her knuckles turned white. Evan looked like he had been slapped. For the first time, their rehearsed sympathy slipped away, replaced by panic. They had come expecting a compliant widow. Instead, they found a woman 3 steps ahead, backed by the man they thought was gone forever. That evening, the phone rang again. This time it was my daughter, Molly. Her voice carried a softness that might have fooled me once. "Hi, Mom. How are you holding up?" "I am fine, Molly," I answered carefully. "Actually, your brother came over this morning." "Oh," she said, a little too quickly. "He didn't mention that when we talked yesterday." So they were comparing notes. I took a breath. "Tell me something, Molly. Have you and Evan been discussing my living situation?" There was a pause, then her tone grew measured. "We are just worried about you, Mom. Being alone in that big house, managing everything by yourself. It is a lot." There it was again. The script. The same words Evan had used, now in Molly's voice. "I see," I said slowly. "And I suppose you have some ideas about what I should do." "Well," she hesitated, "there are communities where you would have support and still keep your independence." Independence. They used that word like a promise, but I heard the truth behind it. What they really wanted was control. The following morning, I walked up the worn staircase to Victor Hale's law office. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, but the air inside felt heavy. Victor greeted me with a hug, then guided me into his private office. On his desk sat a thick folder marked Whitaker Family Trust Confidential. "Joanna," he said gently, "Harold asked me to hold certain information until the day I believed you needed it. After yesterday, I think that day has come." He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, credit card statements, and mortgage documents. Harold hired a private investigator during his last months. He was worried about Evan's spending and Molly's sense of entitlement. These records confirm his instincts. Evan and Lena are drowning in debt over $200,000. They have refinanced their home twice and borrowed against his retirement. Molly and Ryan are not much better. They are carrying $150,000 in loans, trying to maintain a lifestyle beyond their means. I stared at the numbers, my stomach tightening. Victor placed another document in front of me. My breath caught. A life insurance policy recently filed, $2 million. Beneficiary Evan Whitaker, a clause doubling the payout in case of accidental death. The room tilted. He took out a policy on me? Victor's expression was grim. Molly was present when he applied. Harold suspected this might happen. That is why he left you more than protection. He left you resources your children never knew existed. 2 days later, I agreed to meet everyone at Victor's office. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. Evan and Lena sat on one side of the long table, Molly and Ryan on the other. Their eyes darted between Victor and me, searching for clues. Victor opened the first folder and slid it across the table. "Evan, would you care to explain why you took out a $2 million life insurance policy on your mother?" The silence was sharp. Lena's face drained of color. Molly's jaw dropped. Evan stammered, it's not what it looks like." "It looks like you are betting on my death," I said calmly. "And with the accidental death clause, it looks like you were planning to hurry it along." Molly's eyes flickered. "You knew about this?" I asked. She said nothing, but her silence was its own answer. Victor placed another folder on the table. Inside were account summaries Harold had built in secret. "Your father ensured your mother would never be dependent on anyone. Joanna controls more than $3 million in assets you did not know about." Ryan leaned forward. "Then what happens to it?" "Nothing happens to it," I said, my voice steady. "It remains mine to use however I see fit." Evan's face twisted. "We are your children. We have rights." "You have exactly what you earned," I replied. "And after everything I've heard and seen, that amounts to nothing." Lena stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "This is insane." "No," I said, rising to my feet. "This is clarity. For the next 5 years, if any of you contact me about money, inheritance, or my living situation, everything goes to charity. If love is real, it can wait. If not, then I finally know where I stand." The room fell into a silence thicker than stone. For the first time in months, I felt taller than my grief. Weeks passed, and the silence in my house no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like peace. For the first time since Harold's passing, I began to build a life that belonged to me alone. I enrolled in an Italian cooking class at the community center and laughed as I fumbled through my first attempt at handmade pasta. I booked a long postponed trip to Ireland, a dream Harold and I once shared. I volunteered twice a week at the local animal rescue, where a shy golden retriever named Daisy Ironic, given my allergy, learned to trust again beside me. The phone stayed quiet. No check-ins laced with hidden agendas. No casual questions about my investments. No thinly veiled pressure to leave my home. I slept through the night without waking to worry about what scheme might appear next. Each morning, I brewed coffee and stepped into Harold's rose garden. The blooms were steady, patient, and unbothered by human greed. Standing there, I realized something simple but powerful. Survival was no longer my goal. Living fully, joyfully, on my own terms, that was the new beginning. Just when I began to believe the storm had passed, Caleb Morton, the investigator Harold had hired, called me with a voice edged in warning. "Mrs. Whitaker, I think you should see something." An hour later, he sat at my kitchen table with his laptop open. On the screen were screenshots of text messages between Evan and Lena, copied from a cloud backup Caleb had been monitoring. The first one froze me. "Lena, she's been gone 3 months. Maybe it's time to try a different approach." Evan's reply: "I don't think she's coming back from this, but Tom thinks we should wait." Then another message appeared. "Lena, what if we were wrong about the insurance? What if there's another way? Evan, the investigator she hired, is probably expensive. Maybe if we make her feel threatened, she'll come back to us for protection." My stomach tightened as Caleb clicked to the final exchange. Evan wrote, "If emotional manipulation doesn't work, we might have to get creative. Tom found out about Mom's real net worth, enough to solve everyone's problems permanently." Lena answered, "What kind of creative?" His reply was simple, chilling. "The kind where accidents happen to people who travel alone." I closed the laptop. Their betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a plan. Before I could decide my next step, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Molly and Ryan standing on my porch, smiling too brightly. Caleb's hand moved immediately to his phone. "They're here," I whispered. He spoke quickly into the receiver. "This is Morton. We need backup now." I opened the door just enough to meet their eyes. "Mom," Molly said sweetly, "we were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by." Before I could answer, Ryan added, "Not about money. Just family." They stepped past me into the living room without waiting for permission. Caleb rose from his chair, folding his laptop closed. Ryan's gaze lingered on him. "And who might you be?" Caleb's voice was calm. "A friend." Ryan smirked, but there was tension in his jaw. Molly wandered to the mantel, picking up photos from my cooking class. "You look happy, Mom." "Italy was good for you." My skin prickled. "I haven't been to Italy yet," I said flatly. She covered quickly. "Oh, I meant the cooking class." The mask slipped further when Ryan's tone hardened. "You've been traveling alone. That can be dangerous." His words were not concern. They were warning. Before I could respond, the faint sound of sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed against the window panes. Caleb exhaled slowly, relief crossing his face. "Actually," he said, "Miss Whitaker isn't telling you anything. She's pressing charges." Ryan's smirk collapsed as uniformed officers stepped into the doorway. The officers took control quickly, gathering Ryan and Molly's protests into evidence along with Caleb's file. Within minutes, the house that had once echoed with whispered schemes felt safe again. I stood by Harold's roses as they led my children and their spouses away, my heart heavy yet strangely light. Weeks passed. Legal proceedings moved forward, but I chose not to follow every detail. Courtrooms and charges would handle what needed to be handled. My focus was elsewhere. I booked my trip to Ireland, continued cooking classes, and filled my days with laughter at the animal shelter. The phone remained quiet, and for the first time in years, I was grateful for the silence. One afternoon in Galway, I sat in a small cafe, writing postcards to my neighbor Nancy about the green hills and the sea air. My phone buzzed with a message from Evan, sent from prison. "Mom, I'm sorry. Please forgive me." I stared at it for a long moment, then pressed delete. Some bridges are not rebuilt. Some are meant to burn, leaving behind enough light to see your path clearly. Looking back, I understand now that Harold was right. People change when money enters the room. The same faces that once smiled with love can harden into masks of calculation. What saved me was not suspicion, but preparation and the courage to act when the truth revealed itself. If there is anything I hope you take from my story, it is this: concern without consent is not care, it is control. Documentation is not paranoia, it is protection. And boundaries are not cruelty, they are a love letter to your future self. So if someone in your life tries to rush your decisions, if they pressure you to sign papers or sell property before you are ready, pause. Urgency is a tactic, not a necessity. Keep copies of your documents, know who your allies are, and never let loneliness trick you into surrendering your independence. Build community with people who love you for who you are, not for what you own. I chose freedom over fear. I chose peace over manipulation. And today, as I sip tea in a quiet kitchen filled with roses, I know I chose correctly. If my story gave you clarity or courage, tap like so it reaches the next person who needs it. Share it with a friend who is navigating difficult family ties. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I read every word, and your voice matters.